Welcome back to Celebrity Radio. It's Alex Belfield talking to some of the world's biggest stars and some of the most influential people. And we've got a man for you today who's got a brand new book out called The Third Plate. He's a man who knows everything about food. He's called Dan Barber and he joins us on the phone now live from New York. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. I mean, when I look at your CV, it seems to me you're the man to go to when it comes to gastronomy and food and also the heritage of food. That's what you're king on, isn't it, really, where your food comes from?
I'm keen on that because it interests me, but also because it ultimately makes me a better chef than I would be without knowing the provenance and then having a story for the food that we serve at my restaurants.
It's so interesting. You're there in New York, which, let's face it, is a place where you can't fake it. Anybody can open a restaurant in New York, but they won't necessarily last. I have to ask you the question, Dan. What's the key to success in having a surviving restaurant in probably the most competitive city in the world?
If I knew the key to success for restaurants in New York, I would have been opening one every couple of years. But we're on our 15th year now for Blue Hill, New York City, and on our 10th year for Blue Hill at Stone Barns, which is a restaurant and farm just outside New York City, a few miles just outside of New York City. But I don't know that the secret might be that there is no secret, and that it's a very competitive environment. I doubt it is much less or much more competitive than the London dining scene, which I know from experience is at the height of delicious cuisine. So I can only say I'm glad I didn't open in London.
I will agree with you, but equally, I think in New York, what I love about Manhattan is that you can turn any corner and probably find good food, even in a small cafe. It's an extraordinary place, isn't it, where some of those diners do offer exceptional value, as does a 3 Michelin star restaurant next door.
Yeah, no, that's always been the beauty of New York, that you can experience different cuisines and different approaches to food at several different levels of expense, and through have a really thrilling evening. It's one of the great pleasures of visiting and living in New York.
Who for you right now is the guy to go to if it wasn't yourself in terms of food and creativity? For me, when I ate at Joel Robuchon for the first time, I thought he's a guy who knows how to cook. I spent a lot of time in Las Vegas, and people are always surprised when I say there are some of the greatest chefs there. Guy Savoy's restaurant is stunning, I think. Who for you is offering great food and innovative food right now?
You know, I'm very interested in... you're talking about in New York, right? Or you were talking about around the United States or around the world?
Yeah, anywhere around the world.
Yeah, well, around the world, I mean, I'm very interested in the work that a chef by the name of Ben Shrewey is doing in Melbourne at his restaurant Attica. And I don't know if you've heard of it, but you will, I think, very soon. He's a brilliant, thoughtful, young chef who is resurrecting some of the lost ingredients and lost flavors and lost cuisine of Australia, and doing it in a modern context in a way that I think speaks to really the future of food. Is how do we take the true, delicious, cultural spirit and sense of place of the past in any country and any culture, and reinvent it and modernize it appropriately with good technique and great ingredients, and use that as a springboard for an exciting restaurant experience of the present and the future. I think that's where we're looking more at for signs of how food and good cooking will play out the next several years.
It's very interesting. I've been very lucky to interview a lot of top chefs around the world, and the two things that always strike me as clearly apparent about you is, firstly, you're incredibly hardworking, but B, you're all artists and show-offs. And I think what you have to be careful of is that doesn't get the better of you. I've been in some restaurants recently where the plate is so clever, the food is almost lost, and we've sort of gone through a phase where it's become a bit up its own backside, hasn't it?
I think you're right. it dials back to your original question, which is, how do you stay competitive in an environment in the city that's the ultra destination for great eating, and you do that in part by setting yourself apart with your cooking and your plates of food. And what ends up happening, I think, in some ways, from no fault of the chef, is that in that drive to be distinctive, you end up, in your words, cluttering and in some ways confusing, the potential for great flavors and a great menu. And that's, somewhat a product of separating yourself. But as we have gone through this phase of so many restaurants in the last decade or so many exciting, great restaurants open, we've also taken a turn, it seems like, and this is true, I think, of all the great restaurants now in the world, is that they are stripping the plates down to really the essential components and essential flavors, and those components, those flavors tend to have a story attached to them and tend to have a real sense of place, where the experience of eating connects you to something. We think of restaurants so much. We think of restaurants as places of escaping the harried, crazed lives that we all live. But also restaurants, I think, and increasingly good restaurants, are places of connection, and that connection is to in large part to the natural world, to more natural ingredients and to a natural landscape that produces those tastes and experiences. And like I said, I think that's where we're headed with fine dining in the future.
I don't know how you feel, but I get very pissed off when I go in restaurants and I order a king scallop, for example, and it's covered in some goo and I can't taste it. Is it my right to be annoyed by that, or should I allow the chef to do what he wants to do and give me what he thinks is appropriate?
I don't know. I get annoyed by that too, so I can't impugn you for that lack of patience. We don't get that many nights out, and so when you have disappointing experiences, I too don't have a lot of patience for it.
It's interesting, as the world rotates, dining is still one thing that people will find money for. It amazes me that in the worst economies, people will still go out and treat themselves, because it's the one essential thing we've got to do, which is feed ourselves. But it's the one treat we love, isn't it? And it seems to me a bit like that old saying, nobody ever remembers what you say, but how you make them feel. And the dining experience, I know that saying is a little cliched, but it's so true, isn't it? You can have the most amazing food, but if it's in the wrong environment, or it's too light or too noisy, it can be ruined by other factors.
Yeah, that's true. That's why this drive to associate the food with a larger context, an agricultural context, a farming context, a cultural context, historic or otherwise, is so important to chefs, because they know that even on their best nights of cooking, nothing compares to the feeling that you get when you know that the food you're eating is connected to something much larger than just a plate of food.
And certainly that's the case with you. If you Google Dan Barber, one of the things you especially see on YouTube is your incredible work that you do with your farms. And you see it as incredibly important, don't you, that you support them as much as they support you. I think in Britain now we've got this huge debate about milk. Farmers are actually losing money selling milk now to supermarkets. They're going out of business. And that can't be right, because we need them and they need us, and they should be rewarded for it. You don't allow that to happen in your restaurants, do you?
We don't allow it to happen, and the reason for that is because I'm protecting the future of great flavor. I mean, while I feel a sense of obligation to good small farmers, dairy farmers alike, I in fact, Blue Hill is a dairy farm that my grandmother started and that we still run, and so we get a lot of our dairy in both restaurants from our small farm in the Berkshires in western Massachusetts. And so we support farms like our own farm and other farms, but we're doing it ultimately for the preservation of deliciousness, and that's the pursuit. The fact that when you pursue truly great flavors, you know, really not dumbed down flavor, but truly great flavors, ultimately you are connecting with the right kind of landscape and the kind of landscape we all want to preserve for future generations. It is sort of axiomatic, but it is impossible to have a great tasting carrot, a truly delicious carrot, and have that come from a denuded landscape or poor soils. It's impossible. Physiologically, it's an impossible thing. So what we do when we support really great flavor, and I think more importantly to the book that I wrote, when we support cuisine, when we support the right kind of patterns of eating that support a landscape, we tend to put the pieces together in a way that's very hopeful, actually. And the problem is that we, at least in the culture in the United States, I don't know if this is true of the UK, but in the United States, we do have a problem with associating great food and fine dining or good restaurant with a sense of elitism. And that's an unfortunate association, because in fact, what we are doing is harking back to a time when agriculture was in the hands of really peasants and producing food for the sake of the community and eking out what the landscape could provide, but doing it sustainably only because that was the only way that you know, our peasant farmers in any country could do it. That's how the great cuisines of the world developed. And so chefs today, I think, are taking advantage of that history and reinterpreting it, but always with the connection to good farming and good agriculture. Without that, it's impossible to have to be a good chef and to create great flavors.
This might be the stupidest question I've asked you today, Dan, but can an amazing chef like yourself make a great meal out of very average products, or does it all have to come from the quality of ingredients in the first place?
You know, it's a funny thing, because my knee-jerk reaction is, you know, no, it's impossible to do truly great cooking with mediocre ingredients. But then one could push me, I guess, back and say, well, what's your definition of mediocre ingredients? Because is for example, I'm thinking tonight on my menu, I have veal shank on my menu, right? So now, is veal shank a mediocre cut from that animal? I mean, one could argue that compared to the loin or the rack or some other cuts of this delicious veal, the shank is sort of, you know, this mediocre, difficult to eat, difficult to chew cut. But that's where I think, you know, great cooking comes into play. By the way, I don't have to use a part of an animal. I could use a harvest of carrots that went through a terrible freeze, and for no fault of the farmer, were degraded a bit. Part of I think the challenge and part of the responsibility of great cooking is to transform all ingredients into something that's both nutritious and delicious. So you know, fundamentally, I would say, well, we can't be great chefs without great ingredients, but also part of our job, I think, is to recognize that the craft of cooking is to manipulate ingredients into delicious flavors. That's what we've been doing since the beginning of time.
And again, some of my favourite meals. Belly pork is one of my favourite meats in the entire world. Cooked brilliantly, it can be the most delicious thing. Cooked badly and quickly by the wrong person, it can be the worst thing you've ever put in your mouth. It's interesting. I got to ask you about where you get your skill. I mean, do you feel it's God-given and some form of divine intervention, or is it a skill that you've been taught? My experience with chefs is it's a bit like a singer. The great ones can't really be taught it. You feel it.
I wish I felt that way, that there was some kind of divine intervention going on, but I don't. I'm not of that school. I actually agree with you about singers, from the ones that I know and know well. You know, I do believe that, but with me anyway, as a chef, I don't think I have any natural talent for chefing. I think, if anything, I've been blessed by having worked with some of the most incredibly inspired chefs in the world, in France especially, when I was training, and to be inculcated with their discipline and their sense of taste is the reason that I'm successful today.
And I've got to ask the obvious question, are the French still the best at cooking traditional, simple ingredients the best?
I think the French are, at least in the United States, the French are looked at as having lost a step or two in the pursuit of great cooking. And I think that's a little overblown. We've seen the rise of all these other countries, Asia especially, but Denmark, and we've seen Italy, and we've seen Spain, a rise, and the UK. Some great chefs and great restaurants. And France has, been relegated to kind of second status. I don't think that's true, and I think what we'll see in the next several years is a resurgence of great French cuisine and great cooking, because of the very point that you just made, is that there is no one better at taking great ingredients, and transforming them into something that really sings. And that comes from generations and generations of a culture of great cooking and cuisine, and that hasn't gone anywhere. It's dissipated, and it's been bastardized in some ways, and as it has in many countries in France. But I think it's so embedded in what it means to be French that I don't think we will see the great French cuisine. Cuisines, actually, it's not one cuisine, but many cuisines that represent France disappear, and that, in fact, we'll see a resurgence of it in the next few years.
I think if they only added more butter and cream to their dishes, it would be so much more flavoursome, wouldn't it?
I don't know. I think that gets a bad rap. The bad French cooking has a lot of butter and cream, but really the great French cooking is yes, it's a dairy culture, because it has the right grass and the right the right climatic conditions for a dairy agriculture, and so that's infused itself into the cooking in a way that's brilliant, I think. In southern Italy, that doesn't make sense, because it's based on olive oil and oil. So it depends on where you are. I think with the really good cooking, and I'm not talking about fine French cooking, but just simple great French peasant cuisine, is not overly rich. It's the bad interpretations of it that are.
I don't know about you, I just spent some time in Malaga last month, and just sitting in a bar eating great fresh bread with some wonderful manchego cheese and some fresh ham and olives is the happiest joy of my life, equal to eating in a 3-star Michelin restaurant. There's equal measures of food, isn't there, on both ends of the spectrum?
No, I think you can take as much pleasure from that kind of meal as you can from the greatest meal at Joël Robuchon. But it's the time and place. It's where are you, and what are you feeling, and what's the experience that you want. And there's so many inroads into the pleasures of good food that hard to define.
And it's still controversial. I see on page 109, I made a note that you talk about foie gras. And again, in Nottingham, the restaurants just banned it today. I know in certain parts of California, it's banned. Food is still controversial, isn't it? Because ultimately, it affects the land, it affects animals, and people have opinion about it.
Yeah, I think food needs to get more controversial before it gets less. Because the controversy in large part that we're seeing in the United States, and I think we're, from what I understand, seeing in the UK, is based on a generation of being increasingly removed from how our food is grown and who's growing it for us, how it's getting to us, and the effects of that have not been benign, and we're seeing it in the health effects, we're seeing it in the environmental effects, and it seems to me that the controversy that's surrounding that is a good thing, because it's bringing to light some practices that both are not sustainable and not delicious, and we ought to grab hold of the nuts and bolts of farming. How are we going to produce sustenance and pleasure for future generations? And that's not something to be taken lightly. And so we need to get controversial and get the word out and connect people more with where their food's coming from.
It's amazing to me. In 1998, I did a breakfast show in Kenya, and I didn't see many clinically or morbidly obese people there. And I come back to England today, and I just see fatties walking around everywhere. And I wonder how people don't get, even post-Atkins, that sugar is a killer and will make you fat. 11 teaspoons of sugar in your can of Coke is extraordinary, yet people will still put it inside them. It's amazing to me.
Yeah, it is to me too. But that's the upshot of an agriculture system in Europe and in America that favors cheap commodity products, and sugar is one of them. Corn syrup is sugar; it's another one. White flour and wheat is essentially a sugar, and that's another one.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about is the product actually of agriculture. Of agriculture in these countries that's supported with tax dollars, and that's the result of being disconnected from how our food is grown.
I found your book utterly riveting. It is fascinating. It is the size of a Bible, and it is the food Bible. It's called The Third Plate by Dan Barber. It's out now. Dan, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Blue Hill is his restaurant. Dan Barber is your man, and the new book is called The Third Plate. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.